Hey everyone, I hope you are all doing well and having a good semester so far. I wanted to come on and touch base with you about a few things. As you can see next to me here, I have a sort of informal agenda for today. I want to spend a little time going over some business items, just touch base about the course, some big assignments that are starting to come up on our horizon, and then I wanted to just spend a little time talking about the Farmer et al. Reading, the structural violence and clinical medicine reading for this week, and also just a few comments on SCLUT. Y'all are making some great observations in your discussion post and also in your quizzes, and there are a few things that I just want to touch base about. So first off, to these business items, so to speak, let me pull up the syllabus here and put it into full screen. So I just want to go over a couple of things that are coming up just so they don't really surprise you. So here you can see we are in week 6. And this week we are reading chapters 20 through 22 in SCLUT and as the Farmer reading on structural violence and clinical medicine. And this week is kind of a normal week for us. We just have a discussion post, a response, and then the quiz. But I do want to point out a couple of things. Next week we have 2 readings in the Conrad text. So just a heads up there, that might be a little bit more of a dense week for us. And then jumping ahead, you'll notice in week 9 here, by March 22nd, I would like your final paper topic ideas. So probably would be great if you start thinking about what you want your final paper to be on. And just to refresh everyone's memory, let me scroll up in our syllabus here. Our final paper is essentially a research paper. All right, and you also have the side media project. So the paper is worth 100 points, the media project is worth 40. And each student will develop a final paper and a health media project based on the concepts and approaches discussed in the course. The paper will be 10 to 12 pages, and then you also need a 3-minute accompanying either video, PowerPoint, something with Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, whatever. So be creative and have fun. And the project will be graded in relevance to the course, the innovativeness, freshness of idea, etc. So sometimes when I'm starting a project, I'll like to just sort of brainstorm. And for me, I usually try to pick a topic that is something along the lines that I'm just usually interested in. So my project, my last research has been on military spouses who have been surrogates for other people. And this really stemmed from my general interest in assisted reproductive technology, how people make families, and just that I thought it was super fascinating that people would have babies for others. So that's coming up on the 22nd. You have some time, but I just wanted to plant the seed that that's on the horizon. And then your next big assignment that's coming up is not until April 1st, and that is your midterm essay. In a couple weeks, I will be posting the prompt that I want you to focus on for the midterm. And so please keep an eye out for that. And I, of course, will keep you posted on that. So those are a couple things that are coming up. And like I said, I just really wanted to give you a heads up on what was going on there. Of course, if you have any questions about stuff, please just send me an email or post to the general discussion board on Blackboard. I know sometimes brainstorming topics can be a little difficult, so if you want to maybe just send me some ideas that you think are good, and then we can start to work through there. But generally, of course, since this is a sociology of medicine class, the topic should be something related to the huge umbrella of medicine. So perhaps you're interested in gender issues when it comes to medicine, or race issues, or even along the lines of what we've been reading about this week, right? In this Farmer piece about the structural sort of incompatibilities of different branches of medicine. Or we can do something more along the lines of what we're reading in SCLUT. So there's a lot of wiggle room there for you, which I know is actually sometimes really uncomfortable for students. But ideally, you'll pick a topic that you're actually interested in learning a little bit more about. So like I said, if you have any questions, please just feel free to email me there. All right. Now, Next, on to the farmer reading. So I think this one was actually pretty straightforward, and I hope that you will feel the same. But I just wanted to touch on a couple of key points. And I think what they do very nicely is start to break down the different structural components of the medical field. And so, to a certain extent, we've been spending the last few weeks talking about the disparities when it comes to race and gender and class in health and medical outcomes. And last week we even, last week was just the SCLUT reading, but in the SNOW piece that we read a little while ago, they asked how we even measure things. Remember, they were teasing out the difference between sex and gender and the problems that come when we just collapse those two concepts, and then it throws measurement off, or we maybe have different measurements of things, etc. And what I really appreciated about this farmer piece is now we're getting into some of the incompatibilities that just exist within the structure of medicine. So many of us, especially people in the sociology of medicine in this class, know that there are significant racial, gender, class disparities when it comes to medicine. And sometimes from the outside looking in, it might just be really frustrating to wonder why clinicians don't seem to have a better grasp of this. And to a certain extent, it's because of the structure of medicine and the medical field and how things are set up. So Farmer on the first page says, inequality of gender, race, poverty, political violence and war, etc., right, often determine who falls ill and who has access to care. And for practitioners of public health, the social determinants of disease are even harder to disregard. Unfortunately, this awareness is seldom translated into formal frameworks that actually link social analysis to everyday clinical practices. And this is a huge barrier, as they go on to describe to us. So they say a tendency only to ask biological questions about what are in fact biosocial phenomenon, right? And that biosocial category is going to embrace a lot of these things that we've been talking about. The other key thing from this reading that I want us to all make sure we have a good foundation of is this notion of structural violence. This definitely transcends past more than just the sociology of medicine, and I think is a concept that is probably going to be applicable in a lot of your other classes as well, right? But structural violence essentially is a way of describing social arrangements that put individuals and populations in harm's way. The arrangements are structural because they are embedded in the political and economic organization of our social world, and they're violent because they cause injury to people, typically not those responsible for perpetuating such inequalities. With few exceptions, clinicians are not trained to understand these social forces. And in the reading, they have a separate little box there, right, that tells us a little bit more about structural violence in depth. So please make sure to take a little time to read that little excerpt as well. A couple of things they point out, or language that they use that might not be so familiar to us, is they talk about distal and proximal. These are medical terms. So distal, right, meaning performed late in the process or far away from whenever the initial diagnosis or illness or whatever took hold. Proximal is closer to or before, right, trying to prevent illness through efforts such as vaccination or improved water and housing quality. So like I said, those are medical terms. We don't always see them on the sociology side, so I just wanted to talk about what they really mean. When I was in undergrad very, very long ago, and in anatomy class, I had to remember it by thinking of like proximal, like proximate, like close, and distal, like distant, far away. I'm not sure if that helps. If it does, keep it. If it just confused you all the more, forget I just said that. And then we get a couple of case studies here. They talk about AIDS in the United States and how these biosocial factors have really played a role into how people have gotten treatment. They give us this particular example of this program in Baltimore that's kind of intriguing as far as how they try to deal with the racial, gender, injection drug use, and socioeconomic disparities in outcomes. And then we get a couple of more case studies from Rwanda and rural Haiti, which also tell us different ways that disease and treatment can actually be administered and prevented by focusing on not just the medical treatment aspect, right, but these larger biosocial issues. And so I think the reading is relatively straightforward. They close out by giving us some reasons why structural violence is important to keep in mind, and also why it doesn't really seem to be taken into account. And I think it's important to remember that, as they point out, medical professionals are not trained to make these structural interventions. And we also tend to, in medicine as well as in many other areas of society, think that we have to just focus on one solution, right? It's either all medical or it's all social. And I think what they're trying to argue here is that's not the case. We have to take both sides or both factors into account, right? We don't need those either or choices. We actually just need to focus on both. So if you have any questions about this reading, please send them my way, but hopefully you found this to be relatively interesting and also starting to address some of the concerns that I've even seen creeping up as far as the, tone deafness or blatant inappropriateness of many of the doctors who worked with Henrietta Lacks. Medicine, this huge monolith of medicine, is comprised of many different parts that don't always speak to each other. And I think this piece gives us some good insight into how that very easily happens. All right, and like I said, I wanted to just touch base on this flute reading with you all a little bit. You are making some great observations in your discussion posts and in the quizzes. And one thing I just want to make sure that everybody remembers, although you all do seem to be very well aware, is that this, of course, is taking place in a different time. Things like informed consent, patients' rights, HIPAA laws, those were definitely not in place at the time that Henrietta was alive and going through her illness. And in addition, as many of you have also pointed out, it was a different time as far as race relations in the United States. Segregation was legal. Right, it was the law. And so there are many intersections here that are affecting the trajectory of Henrietta and her personal treatment, and then, of course, the trajectory of Henrietta's cells. And there are a lot of really juicy questions that get brought up in this reading, as far as, ownership and ethics and what is right as far as commoditizing human tissue and body parts, and there's so much to unpack there. So a lot of you have really been tackling this in the post and commentary each week, and I really appreciate that you have all done that. And just to give you a heads up, the midterm paper is going to be solely based on the Henrietta Lacks reading by Skloot. And it's going to be asking you to think about these different intersections that we've already been exploring, as well as start to comb through some of the larger ethical and rights questions that are brought up. So, keep an eye out for that, as you already have been. And, just like I said, in a couple weeks, I'll put the prompt up, and so you can start working on that paper. So that, I think, covers what I wanted to touch base with you all about today. Like I said, if you have any questions about picking a topic, please feel free to email me. If you're on the main Bakersfield campus, I have office hours Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. Also, if you can't come by my physical office hours, we can always plan a time to do a Skype session or a Zoom session, or, like I said, good old-fashioned email. So start ruminating on that. And then this week is just a normal week. We have the discussion questions, and then, of course, your quiz at the end of the week. And I hope you all have a great one. Talk to you soon.